Welcome back to another episode of Unfiltered with Sam. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by one of the most compelling public policy analysts of our time, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. A frequent guest on the world's largest podcasting channels, Professor Sachs is a world-renowned economist, best-selling author, and global leader in sustainable development and geopolitics. He spent most of his early career at Harvard. Yes, that other school that we Stanford grads dare not mention, where he earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in economics, and was named a full professor by the age of 28. At Columbia University, the professor serves as director of the Center for Sustainable Development. Professor Sachs has advised numerous secretary generals of the UN as well as governments across the globe. Buongiorno and welcome, Professor Sachs.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
I understand you're in Rome as we speak right now.
Indeed.
Welcome. So let's kick things off then right away. So while I personally disagree with the violent turn some campus protests had taken, the broader federal response, Professor, raises troubling questions. The recent funding crackdowns on Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, UPenn over anti-Semitism, but really targeting pro-Palestinian speech, point to an unprecedented level of government overreach into academic affairs, which many academics warn could undermine the autonomy of U.S. higher education that we all hold so dear. So how can we still speak, Professor, of academic freedom when a powerful Zionist-aligned lobby wields such disproportionate influence over media, policy, and university governance? Are we not seeing systematic collapse of free inquiry, selectively defended when it serves political narratives, Professor, but swiftly targeted when it challenges them?
Well, we're seeing an assault on the universities for many reasons. One is this purported attack on anti-Semitism, which is really an absurd charge. We can come back to that, but it is a phony charge. But the attack on the universities is broader based. I call it America's cultural revolution, in analogy to what China went through in the 1960s when the universities were closed down. We're nowhere near that point in the United States, but the nastiness of the of the federal government has been quite remarkable. I don't think they're going to get that far, actually. Harvard University recently, that school that must not be named, actually took a stand and said, we're suing the federal government because what it's doing is illegal. What's happened broadly in the United States since January 20th is that President Trump has tried to assert one-person rule based on executive decrees. So the things that are happening are not based on legislation. They're not based on decisions by Congress. They are one-person decisions. And if you go to the website, whitehouse.gov, you can read all of these proclamations as if this person were a king. But we have a constitution, and the Constitution limits the power of the president. The president's powers are spelled out in Section 2 of our Constitution, but Section 1 gives the principal powers to the Congress. Section 3 gives the principal powers, or Article 3, I should say, gives the powers to the courts. And Trump does not have anywhere remotely the powers that he claims. So I don't think this is going to stand. Now, just to come to the specifics, part of this is just an so-called anti-elite or populist backlash. People don't like elite universities, whatever. But to unilaterally cancel contracts, threaten to take over universities, make demands that certain departments must change the way they teach, of course, it's completely outrageous and completely against the law. Part of it, ostensibly, is an attack on anti-Semitism. Well, this is absurd at so many different levels. First, I teach at Columbia University. There is a very significant Jewish student population and Jewish faculty population. I happen to be Jewish myself. There's no anti-Semitism of the institution, period. The whole thing is absurd. But there's a second claim made by people who don't know what they're talking about, that being critical of Zionism is anti-Semitic. There is a huge Jewish tradition criticizing, attacking, opposing Zionism. Zionism is a very conflictual issue in Jewish thought for the last 2 centuries. And in fact, many of the most religious communities within Judaism oppose the state of Israel, period. They don't think it's appropriate. So this idea that attacking Israel or criticizing Israel on the grounds that it's anti-Semitic is basically ignorance by people who don't know what they're talking about. But there's something more, and I think it needs to be said. Israel's behavior is completely despicable. I'm talking about the behavior of the Israeli government. It's committing war crimes and crimes against humanity before our eyes. The destruction that it has wrought in Gaza is absolutely criminal, which is why South Africa brought a case in the International Court of Justice, a case of genocide, no less, under the 1948 Genocide Convention. This is why the International Criminal Court has Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, under an arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity. We can't speak out about that. The whole world should speak out about that. What Israel's doing has been slaughtering innocent women and children and men for, by the way, a very long time, but before our eyes in recent times. And of course, we should speak out against it.
Thank you, Professor. If you may, since you made a connection on Judaism and Zionism. So, Professor, as someone born in the region, educated in the U.S. at a time when free inquiry still held pride of place, and since having returned to live in the region, I've witnessed with growing alarm the deliberate erasure of the line between Judaism, a spiritual tradition grounded in moral principles like tikkun olam, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly,
Yeah.
repairing the world, and Zionism, a modern nationalist ideology. So this fusion is sustained by a powerful PR apparatus and an unaccountable deep state. It has rendered the distinction nearly invisible to the public, to the wider public, not to us who know and study it and dig more deep into it. So how can we could be scholars or ethicists or just the people, the public, begin to even untangle this fusion? Isn't it urgent we reclaim the moral clarity that separates faith from political ideology?
Well, we should just first restore the factual clarity, because Zionism and Judaism are two completely different things. Judaism is a religion that has more than 2,000 years of tradition and practice. What happened in Judaism is it began as a temple religion, or it was a temple religion with the temple in Jerusalem. There was a rebellion, several rebellions, actually three, during the Roman imperial period in 66 to 70 AD, in 115 AD, and in 132 to 135 AD. So I'm talking about 1900 years ago. But there were three rebellions within this Jewish community in the Roman Empire against the Roman Empire. Not a good idea, I have to say. This ended up getting the temple destroyed. It ended getting the Jewish practices at the temple abolished by the Romans, and it led to a period in which there was no temple and no even semblance of Jewish politics or Jewish statehood for nearly 2,000 years. What developed then was the religion that came to be practiced throughout the world by the Jewish people, and that's called Rabbinic Judaism, because Jews were in so many parts of the world, in North America, South America, Europe, in North Africa, in the Middle East, in Central Asia, in India, and they practiced various forms of rabbinic Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism meant a religion that was guided by teachings of rabbis locally and by teachings of what's called the oral tradition, but is written down in books called the Talmud. And in the Talmud, written in Babylonia and completed around 500 AD, it was said, well, don't go back to Israel en masse. There's actually a part of the Babylonian Talmud in which the rabbis were saying, boy, that rebellion was completely destructive of the Jewish people. It was intemperate. It was wrong-headed. So don't do that again. We are a dispersed people. We are guided by ethical laws laid down in the holy books, in especially what's called the Torah in Judaism. And for Christians, it's essentially the Old Testament. But what the rabbi said was going to Israel as a wall, they said. It's a strange word, but it means as a mass movement back to Israel. This is wrong. It is not Jewish practice. So for essentially 1,800 years, there was no idea of Jews going to what had been the site of the temple. Judaism was a rabbinic religion practiced locally and guided by the Talmud and by practices of rabbis in different communities. Starting in really the early 19th century, a movement began that Jews should go back to to Jerusalem and what some called the Holy Land. But who made that movement? It's very interesting. That was not made by Jews. That was made by Protestant fundamentalists, especially in England. They said the Jews should go back. Why? Well, partly they hated Jews. They wanted Jews out of England. They wanted Jews away. And partly they had a Christian fundamentalist idea. This is not mainstream. It's not Catholicism. It's a very distinctive idea that the second coming of Christ depended on the Jews being back in the Holy Land. So this was actually Protestant fundamentalism in Britain that started the so-called modern Zionist movement. At the end of the 19th century, some secular Jews, non-practicing, not religious, didn't know about Rabbinic Judaism, didn't know about the Talmud, didn't know about the teachings of the rabbis, do not go back. They started a nationalist movement, like you said, based and supported by Protestant fundamentalists. It's weird, but this is the truth. This was not even a Jewish religious movement. It was a movement pushed by Protestant fundamentalists and then backed by various groups of essentially secular, non-religious, ethnic Jews to return to Israel. Now, two problems. One, Israel was not empty. Israel was filled with people. It was a region in the Ottoman Empire in the late 19th century, and it was filled with rural and urban communities of Palestinians and generally practicing Islam, but also Christian Arab speakers as well. and a few scattered Jews. So they were not returning to some empty place. They were returning to a place that was fully occupied and it was part of the Ottoman rule. Second, there was huge opposition by the rabbis around the world. Zionism was not a popular movement among the Jewish people. Zionism was broadly opposed. What are you doing? That violates the teachings. That violates the Talmud. We are a diaspora. There's no cause for a state. But the movement, first of all, built on this British Protestant fundamentalist dispensationalism. So this idea that the end of days would come when the Jews return, which is not a Jewish idea, by the way, at all. This is a Christian Protestant idea. And it developed also in the era of high European imperialism. And it also developed, therefore, the idea that you could make a European colony, essentially, in some other place. And the late 19th century was also a period of intense and I think incredibly destructive nationalism. Nationalism at the end of the 19th century meant that places should be of pure nationhood. Each ethnic community should have its own place. But life is different. People are intermingled in this world. And this pure nationalism, of course, led to lots of wars. It led to ethnic cleansing. It led to massacres. It led to genocides. So I have no attraction at all to the kind of nationalism of the late 19th century. It was the prelude to massive disaster in the 20th century. But Zionism was born in that milieu. So it was born out of Protestantism and it was born out of nationalism. It was not a good combination. Jews started to return. The Arab populations opposed this from the start. This is our land. What's happening to us? Of course, during World War I is when the problems really came in their modern form. I have a theorem that all problems in the world go back to the British. They meddled so much everywhere, made a mess in so many places. But what they did specifically in World War I was promise the Ottoman lands to three different groups. This is British style. First, they promised it to the Arabs. They said, if you fight with us against the Turks, this land will be a Arab-led land. This is the so-called McMahon-Hussein correspondence of 1915. They promised it to the French in what's infamously known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that France and Britain, the two major empires of Europe, would divide up the Middle East, essentially. Or the two wannabe remaining empires because they wanted to destroy Prussia, they wanted to destroy the Ottoman Empire, they wanted to destroy the Habsburg Empire, or those all would collapse. And then the third was in 1917, a so-called Balfour Declaration, which said that this land in Palestine would become a Jewish homeland without defining what it meant and ostensibly without jeopardizing any of the rights of the existing peoples there. Well, Britain made a colossal mess, and the fact that these Jewish Zionists began to come into a land that was filled with people that objected to their land being taken over, and that saw themselves becoming second-class citizens over the course of a century, and what one of my colleagues at Columbia University, a great historian named Rashid Khalidi, calls the 100 Years' War on Palestine, began just after World War I. So all of this is to say, Zionism was and remains a controversial nationalist movement with, interestingly, to this day, a very strong political backing by Protestant fundamentalists who are arch Christian Zionists. So if you look at the backing for Israel in the United States, yes, there are many Jews that back Israel, but there are tens of millions of Christian fundamentalists that are also core to the so-called Israel lobby. If you summarize what I'm saying, the idea that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are the same is absurd. It's absurd conceptually. It's absurd historically. It's absurd in that these are two completely different things. And for nearly 2,000 years, Judaism was a rabbinic tradition. It wasn't a nationalist movement, still less an exclusive nationalist movement. And so these two ideas uh, are separate, but now they are conflated by the Zionist cause and the Zionist lobby. Now, just to say in practical terms, given where we are, and in my view, the most important practicality in the world is peace. I think the best we can do under these circumstances is that there would be a Palestinian state and there would be a state of Israel, and that they both exist and they're going to get along. And if they don't get along, they're going to be kept apart by the UN and each one in their security. But right now, there are 8 million Palestinian Arabs and there are about 8 million Jews. And the idea that the Zionists should control everything, which is the idea of this extremist Israeli government, is completely outrageous and is completely an enemy of the peace in the Middle East. So, two states, and let's get on with life.
Professor, thank you so much for that analysis, especially in its historical context. I believe many people in the West are not aware of the historical context that you just presented. So thank you very much for that, especially them hearing it from the mouth of you, a Jewish American, a renowned academic. So since you touched on Semite, I would like to address the manipulation of the term Semite, Professor, and its narrow application to the Jews. How is it that a Palestinian or a Lebanese today can be labeled as anti-Semite when we ourselves are also Semites? I mean, most people in the world are unaware also of this, that the term Semite originally refers to the wide range of Middle Eastern peoples, including Arabs, Assyrians, and Phoenicians, which my ancestors as a Lebanese were. So given this, could you share your thoughts on how the term came to be politically and culturally monopolized to refer exclusively to Jews, particularly in the time we now live when criticism of any Israeli policy is swiftly labeled and shut down as anti-Semitic?
Well, just to say, I don't think it's a matter of race. It's basically a matter of linguistic group. Uh, there's a Semitic linguistic group which includes Arabic. It includes ancient Hebrew. Modern Hebrew is an amalgamation of many different languages, but also ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and a number of other languages spoken in the Middle East and in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia, and elsewhere. So there are a number of languages which are considered part of the Semitic linguistic family. I actually don't know the whole history of how the term evolved into this one specific application, but I do know the history that Jews and Arabs and Arab Muslims, I should say, lived side by side for hundreds of years, actually for thousands of years, and in pretty peaceful terms. There were, of course, Jewish communities all through the Ottoman lands, all through the Arab lands, all through modern day Iran, Persia in history, all over the world. I've visited many of those communities. Generally, it's sad when you visit them now. You often see a beautiful synagogue, maybe from the 16th or 17th century, but there really are no Jews left, or almost none, because Israel came and said, "You must come to us," and uh, a lot of tensions arose with the Zionist movement and with the founding of the state of Israel that didn't exist before. And so Semites lived together in mixed communities. And it's also interesting historically, just to add to this, that uh, in uh, Islamic political practice, which is, after all, 1,400 years basically, uh, the idea was that Jews could live and Christians could live within the Islamic world because in Islam they're regarded as people of the book. But and there were special practices for the continued religious practices of Jews and of Christians within the Islamic lands. But typically, there were taxes put on those communities if you were not Muslim. And what happened throughout history was there were conversions, uh, tax avoidance, let's call it. And so Jews converted to Islam, Christians converted to Islam. And it used to be said in more rational days that many of the Palestinian Arabs in the land of Palestine perhaps were descendants of Jews from the fourth or fifth century, but these are communities that converted to Islam with the rise of Islam in the seventh century and eighth century AD. So I'm talking about well over 1,000 years ago. But it just amplifies the point that this is a community of people that has lived together one way or another. And this conflation of Semitism, anti Semitism, Zionism, Judaism, these are modern constructs that don't fit reality and that are very exclusivist and that have given license to war crimes and have given license to terrible, terrible behavior, especially ethnic cleansing, which Israel has used now repeatedly. In fact, the Zionists used it as a tool of state creation, the so called Nakba or catastrophe that the Arab Palestinians of the Muslim uh, populations faced in 1947 and 1948 when Zionist forces used terrorism to get hundreds of thousands of people to flee from their homes and then declared they could never return again to their homes. So, this kind of exclusivist behavior is absolutely terrible. And what you point out, that Semites are part of a shared linguistic community and a shared historical tradition, that most basic truth was lost in the rhetoric and the propaganda and the violence of the last 100 years.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for that also. Professor, I'm going to go very fast to our last question. I know we're running out of time, even though it deserves an analysis. Just a brief, if you can briefly touch upon it. Now that the Zionist Greater Israel vision is becoming clearer to many, and with Turkey's neo-Ottoman aspirations, particularly as expressed through its blue homeland doctrine, signaling Ankara's intent to reshape spheres of influence and redraw both maritime and territorial borders across the Eastern Mediterranean, how likely if you can briefly, do you see, is it that Israel and Turkey, with their overlapping interests, especially in Syria, but also beyond, could eventually find themselves on a collision course?
Look, the whole region will be on a collision course until some basic realities are accepted. First, there must be a Palestinian state. This is number one, and it is the sine qua non of peace. There is one and only one blockade to a state of Palestine as UN member state, and that is actually the United States. Israel has no veto over Palestine becoming the 194th UN member state. The only one that has a veto is the United States of America. And it used that veto in 2024 to block Palestine's membership in the UN. What I believe is crucial this year is that the entire world, because it's basically everybody but Israel and the United States, say to the United States, you are the blockage of peace. Israel, of course, we understand this is a radical regime, but the United States has the veto. And if the United States stops its veto, there will be a state of Palestine and there will be peace in the region. There will be peace because so vast amount of the war and unrest has come from the denial of basic political rights and self-determination to the people of Palestine under these circumstances of this radical Israeli regime. So this is number one. Number two is there are, and there have been now for thousands of years, many regional actors and powers. This is a complicated region. Turkey is not alone in this region, but the Turkish role is significant, and it has been there roughly for 1,000 years. The Ottomans, depending on the timing, a little bit less. The Seljuks came before. The Turks have been very important in this region for 1,000 years. There are the Arabs. There are the Persians, or today's Iranians. Nobody's going away. These are different regional powers that need to get along with each other. And I'm gratified that there has been a rapprochement recently between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example. Very important. The United States tried to stoke the Sunni Shia divide, but that divide is not traditionally a divide of war. It may be a divide of beliefs, but it is not the cause of war. But the United States, as an empire, tried to stoke the divisions. But also, Turkey and the Arab countries can get along, and they're both part of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. They both support the Islamic Development Bank. They live together in the region. Nobody's going to defeat the other. So going on with war between Turkey or the Arab League or Iran is only a game stoked from the outside by the British or the French or the United States in modern history. I really believe, knowing all of this region pretty well and knowing leaders in this region, if the U.S. would leave them alone, they'd figure out how to make peace.
Professor, thank you for generously sharing your invaluable time and providing such insightful analysis. I hope we were able to explore new perspectives that haven't been covered in previous interviews we might have given. As someone from the region, my aim was to ask you questions that Western podcasters have not by way of neglect on their part, but by way of them not hailing from this region.
Well, I very much appreciate being together with you and the interview also. It's very interesting, and these are topics that are not well understood in general by people who use words as weapons, but we should use words for understanding.
Thank you, Professor. May God bless you and grant you health, because we need more of you around.
Thank you so much.
If you found this interview insightful and interesting, do let us know by liking and dropping a comment below. Let us know what you thought of what Professor Sachs presented. Make sure you also hit the subscribe button and tap that notification bell so you never miss on new content drops from the channel, and share the channel link with friends who would also find whatever we put out equally informative.